Before I share with you a few ideas, let me also explain why I'm a bit nervous this morning. I have in this room my wife, and I also have in this room my mother, so you can imagine how challenging that is. The way I understand our discussion this morning is that I get to share with you a few ideas, and I will try and keep it as brief as possible because one, I know that most of you have to rush to work, but also I think the value of this discussion should be in the exchange of ideas, and if we can try and keep it as interactive as possible and ensure that it does not become just a lecture on my side, and I intend not to lecture, by the way. I think that would be a very good thing to do, and it would also allow us to fully benefit from this opportunity of being in the same room, which doesn't happen most times. Let me start by saying that it's a well-documented fact. I think a lot has been written about the success of Lesotho in the last 15 or so years in attracting investments, in achieving what most countries in sub-Saharan Africa in particular are still struggling to achieve, which is a vibrant export-led strategy that has created jobs and has delivered substantial gains. And it is also, I think, a fact that this growth has been led by one sector. And I think just to illustrate and put into perspective the magnitude of what has been achieved just in one sector, and this is the apparel sector, the textile and clothing sector. In terms of job creation up to date, we have just under 40,000 people employed in the sector today. We are the largest exporter of clothing to the US market in sub-Saharan Africa in volume terms, and until a year or two ago, we're actually the largest exporter of clothing in dollar terms and in volume terms. We export about 80% of this to the US market, and the remainder goes mainly to a handful of countries, including South Africa. And South Africa, by the way, is the second market for our exports. If I can also just cite another example, just to give you to illustrate the scale of this industry. Today, every day in this town in Maseru, we produce about 76,000 pairs of jeans. That is a lot of jeans, as you can imagine, and all these go to various buyers, are produced for various buyers in the US, like I said. And as a result of this, of course, government revenue has increased, significant gains have been made in terms of employment, and to a certain extent, there's also been some gains on the business sector in terms of being able to ensure that local businesses, local entrepreneurs provide services that support these operations. It is also, I think, a fundamental fact that these investments are not here because of the domestic market in Lesotho. People don't invest in Lesotho because they see Lesotho as an attractive market. They invest in Lesotho to take advantage of market access conditions in other countries. And this, I think, is where one of our challenges lies. That the dependence, not just on a small basket of export products, but also dependence on one or two markets, leaves us quite vulnerable. And I think in the last couple of years, particularly after 2008, we've seen that. And recently in the US, when the main instrument that allows us to export into the US, a key part of it came for renewal, and it was stuck in the US Senate for reasons that had nothing to do with Lesotho. I think that clearly demonstrates the challenges we have. I think it is also important that we should not just acknowledge but actually celebrate the fact that we have, to a certain extent as a country, succeeded in putting in place an investment promotion strategy that has delivered these jobs, and that continues to at least to ensure a trickle, even if it's now slowing down, of investments. But my sense is that, and this is where I think I would like us to focus, my sense is that as much as we've done this much and we've done well compared to others, the strategy has missed one very key factor in my view, which, unless addressed and addressed quite urgently, we run the risk of even unraveling some of these gains that we've made. The strategy we have, the strategies that we've had over the past couple of years that has led us to where we are today, have been unable, at least up to now, to provide a platform that would help integrate our own private sector into these industries, but also to ensure that the full potential of this economy, of which I think there's quite a significant one, is realized. Now, dependence on FDI, on highly mobile investments, leaves us quite vulnerable, but also it ensures that the economic development and the growth that we want, which should then translate into more sustainable employment, drive innovation, but also drive economic diversification and economic empowerment in general, has not been realized. And if we are going to be able to then say, these investments are here to stay, these investments have actually transformed our own societies and have actually opened up opportunities that would not have been possible, then we need to revisit the way we do business. Of course, then the question is, what is it that we can do that hasn't been done before? And I think, at least my sense is that we know almost everything in terms of what has to be done. We have researched, a lot has been written, a lot has been studied. I think we must be one of the most studied countries on earth, because there's a whole warehouse full of studies on Lesotho, from poverty reduction to everything. So the solutions are there, the ideas are there. All we need to do is actually do them, is actually implement them. And if today we can begin to consider just a handful of these ideas, and also maybe initiate a forum or a discussion that would allow us to begin to see how we can move on these issues. And of course, we don't have to move on 100 issues at the same time, because having 100 priorities is as good as having none. So it's not the Christmas approach to policy making, the Christmas tree approach to policy making, but it's what are the key fundamental issues that we need to do. And the reality is also that it cannot be the public sector's burden to deliver this. It has to be a shared responsibility. The private sector has its own share of heavy lifting to do, and government has its own share of heavy lifting to do. And the government, through institutions like the one I work for, has a major role to play in creating that possibility. Let me just go through a couple of these ideas and see if if you share them, and see if they can help us begin this discussion, which I think would take us down the right path. Because anyway, frankly, the alternative is not an option. And starting with my own institution, I think they say charity starts at home. We need a radical rethink of how institutions like LNDC engage the private sector. We have about 45 years of industrial heritage, of industrial experience in LNDC. So for 45 years, LNDC has driven economic growth, economic development in this country. So we have a good sense of what we do. But I think it's also a fact that we have devoted all that towards one strategic objective, and that was to turn Lesotho into an attractive destination for FDI. We have dressed up. If Lesotho was a person, I would say we've always made sure that it's well dressed up, it's well presented and well packaged. And I think if you look around, you see results for that. But we've forgotten one key pillar in that process, and this is why I'm saying that we needed a radical rethink of how we do business. And that is that at the end of the day, domestic investment also has a key role to play. And it's actually much less mobile than foreign investment in some cases. And that if these investments are going to take root and deliver on some of these sustainable gains, they have to be driven or at least partly owned by local, they have to have a high local, domestic content. And as LNDC, I think it's time that we have to rethink the way we do business. I'm not saying we should give up mobilizing foreign investment, but I'm saying that we have to devote the same level of resources, the same level of attention on what we can contribute towards leveling the playing field to make sure that a foreign investor and a local entrepreneur, to the extent possible, enjoy the same support and have the same chances of succeeding. One possible program that we could start, for example, as LNDC, would be to put in place what I would call a vendor development program. And the objective here is simple. It would be to develop our own entrepreneurs and suppliers of services to these industries. Ensure that the excuses that we hear every day that our suppliers are unreliable, the quality of their products and their services leaves a lot to be desired, and therefore they can never be included in the supply chain. We need to take care of that. And the only way we can do that is by ensuring that we provide all the bells and whistles that go with such a program. And key at the top of that list is creating an incentive for investors to source from local suppliers. And here we can be creative. We could take the form of tax incentives, it could take the form of rebates, but there has to be a structured, articulated strategy towards this. Right now, it's done, but it's done in a very disorganized way. There is no enforceable policy strategy in place that will ensure that every investor that comes knows that if I do A, B, C, D, I will not only get good marks, but I'll get a rebate. I'll also get concessions that will help me grow my business. But also imagine a situation where you are a manufacturer in Lesotho and your inputs have to come from a supplier as far out as Bangladesh or wherever. Your transaction costs are very high, your turnaround times are very high. You can forget about trying to put in place a just-in-time inventory management system because you're just too far from your supplier. But if the same supplier is just sitting down the road at Hatizane, you don't have any stock levels to maintain, you don't have any transaction costs, no transport costs whatsoever. And imagine what it does for competitiveness. So I think the opportunities are there.